Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Barbara Grohe is the superintendent of schools for the Iowa City Community School District. Last spring, in front of 4,500 colleagues and members of the American Association of School Administrators, Barb was honored as the 1998 National Superintendent of the Year. How she, as a child of first-generation immigrants, traveled from a small coal mining town in southern Pennsylvania to college, to studying abroad, to teaching, to administrating, is a remarkable story. Barb obtained her BA from Clarion State College in Pennsylvania, her MA in education from Ohio University, and her PhD in urban education from the University of Milwaukee. Some of Barb's philosophy on education includes, and I quote, "Public schools are the public's schools, and the public has a responsibility and privilege to work with the schools. How a community treats its children determines the quality of the society in which we are living." One of her favorite areas of her job is visiting the classroom, which she does frequently. Before coming to Iowa, she was the superintendent in the Milwaukee suburb of Shorewood. This is her 8th year in Iowa City. Barb's community involvements include Noon Rotary Club, the Chamber Board of Directors, Mercy Hospital Board, and the Children's Museum Board. She grew up in a boisterous Italian home. She had 6 siblings and a large extended family. She faced death at an early age as her parents and 4 of her siblings died young. Those circumstances taught her that you live every day to the fullest and that you have a responsibility to make an impact. Barbara and her husband Joe, a 6th grade teacher at Kirkwood, have 2 children, Mark and Anne Marie. Welcome to One of a Kind, Barbara.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to this. I know your story begins in Arnold, Pennsylvania in 1945, where you were born. Tell me about this boisterous family you grew up in, Italian and Lithuanian.
Right. Actually, I was the 6th of 7 children, and we were 2 families because my brothers and sisters, my 4 brothers and my oldest sister, there's 10 years difference between the oldest sister and then my younger sister and I. So my brothers and sister were grown up and starting families of their own when we were just growing up. All of my brothers served in the armed forces, so a lot of our family life frequently involved one of them or both of them being stationed off somewhere, and we went through the Korean War and different eras like that where they were actually in places where my dad and my mother were really worried about their ability to come back safely. And I recall one conversation where we had 3 of them all engaged in conflict situations somewhere in the world at the same time, and it made a truly indelible impression on me, as the rest of our family life did, about just how precious life is, and that you really have to pay attention. My little sister and I were kind of a family unto ourselves because of that 10-year gap. And I was kind of the leader of the neighborhood in terms of the organized activities. It wasn't a time when there were lots of activities organized for children, so you played in your neighborhood. And we had a grand time, and we played school a lot, which had something to do with my future occupation.
Did you think at a young age that you might be a teacher?
Oh yes, I was always going to be a teacher.
You were always
because that was the most profound thing you could be. I mean, that was how you made a difference. And my parents were very, when they came to this country, my dad came to this country, they were looking for a new life. And so this was the land of opportunity, as trite as that sounds. And they were determined that their children would have those opportunities. So this, talking about becoming a teacher, was a really big issue in our family. That was a nice career goal. Now I was the only one that wanted to be an educator, though.
Did your father, just moving back a minute, was your father the Italian?
Yes.
And your mother was Lithuanian?
Yes.
And he didn't work, you came from a coal mining community, but
Yeah.
he did not work in the coal mine.
No, he worked for Alcoa Aluminum. And so he worked at the factory every day and would walk home from the factory. My sister and I would meet him like a block from our house, and we'd walk him the rest of the way home because that was our special time. You got to tell him all of it. You got first crack at him before the truth had to be told when you got home is what happened.
Right.
So we tell him the stories of our lives that day on the walk home, which was really very, very nice. But my dad died very young. He was 55 when he died. But both my parents always believed that you could do and you could be anything you wanted to do. You just had to want it badly enough.
What a wonderful gift they gave you then.
And that is, I mean, I was the first person in our family to go to college, although several of my brothers had gotten degrees, but they'd gotten them through the armed forces. And so when I was in high school, I really wanted to become a teacher. But we had never dealt with this issue of college applications and all of those. And so I remember a guidance counselor in our high school came to our home one night, and he sat with my parents, and he filled out my college application because he said, you must go to college.
And your parents obviously were very encouraging. And
Yes. And it had saved for a long time. This was not a wealthy family, although at the time we didn't know that we were that poor. But I didn't know that till I went off to college and saw other people lived.
Well, how did you did you work while you were at Clarion?
Constantly, several jobs. And at the end of my first year, the night before I was supposed to come home for my freshman year, my dad died of a heart attack. And at the time, my mother had been in an accident. She'd fallen on those old-fashioned porch swings, and it had come down, and she came down straight on her spine, so she was paralyzed, and they weren't sure she would ever walk again. And so when I came home, my mother was paralyzed in a first-floor bedroom made out of our dining room, and my dad had died that night. And the next day I was supposed to be finishing my freshman year at college, and so I came home, and my brother was overseas, so we had him flown in and everything. And
did you think about quitting?
I did quit.
Oh, you did quit?
Because there was no money. My dad had a small insurance policy, and that was never going to be enough. And I had a younger sister at home, and my brothers and sisters all had their own families to take care of, and so it seemed fairly logical that I would come back home. And so I did. I dropped out of school, and I came home. And about 2 weeks before school was supposed to start again, the man who was my debate coach knocked at our front door, and he said, he had been in Europe on his honeymoon. He said, I just got back from Europe, and I found out that you dropped out and about your dad. And he had met my dad because when we were debating in Pittsburgh, my dad had invited this rather large debate team to our home, and he did a big Italian spaghetti dinner for all of the debaters and everything. So we had a great time. So this man knew my dad. And he said, so why aren't you coming back? I said, I don't have any money, which was, I thought, a rather good logical explanation. And he said, well, you have to come back. And so he left, and 2 weeks later he had 3 jobs lined up for me and had gotten me a loan.
And your mother was all right that you could leave at that time?
My sister decided that she would move in, and she would live at home with my mom until my mom recovered, which she eventually did. But she would move her family into our home. And so we did some remodeling so that she and her husband and new little girl could move in.
What a story.
I went off to college.
And thanks to that debate coach. Tell me about him.
He was an amazing man. I've always said that the most important course I ever took wasn't a course, it was getting on the debate team, which happened by accident. I was a typical freshman, and I was completely lost one evening looking for a meeting. And I can't remember what club I was going to join, but it wasn't debate because I'd never done that in high school. And much as people won't believe this now, I was a rather shy high school student. But I went to the wrong meeting. I ended up in this building, and I thought this was whatever club I was looking for, and I went in, and then I was too shy to get up and leave. Well, it turned out it was the debate team, so I thought, well, what can hurt? I'll sit through this meeting. And ended up on the debate team, and eventually another woman and I ended up as the 2 top varsity debaters for our college. And so we debated for 4 years. And we traveled all over the United States. We debated at Harvard and West Point. And
from
at the
Clarion
time, yes,
College.
from Clarion College, which had never had a debate team. He was brand new, the debate team was brand new, we were brand new. I mean, it was an adventure. And I figured that if all you had to do was be able to talk in order to be able to travel around the United States like that, I could certainly handle that.
Talk and see both sides of the issue.
There you go.
There you go.
But the debate experience was a great experience. And then this year, then I kind of lost track of him after I graduated. Then this year, the day before school opened, I received this letter in the mail, and it had his name on it, but a different first name. And it turned out it was his wife, who I've never met. And I opened the letter, and this check fell out. And she told me that he had died about 5 or 6 years ago and had remembered me in his will and had written this whole thing about what an impression I'd made on him as a brand new young debate coach trying to get his first team put together, and how much I had taught him. And so he sent me this check and said he would like you to do something special for yourself. Take a trip, do something that will help you remember what a special person you are. And it just arrived in the mail.
But now you'll have to find some really, really special place
special
to go.
Right.
Oh.
So I'm open for suggestions.
Yeah, okay, all right, let me think about that one. So after this remarkable experience at Clarion with this debate coach, you were off to graduate school then.
Actually, what I did is I went to Spain in between, because I also got a degree in Spanish, because at one time I was going to be a Spanish teacher too. So there was this plan that you could go to Spain, you could study in Spain for 6 months, and it was less expensive than my tuition would have been, and I would end up with a degree in Spanish. And I thought, I think I can do this. I had never been out of the country in my life. And so I went to Spain and lived right outside of Madrid for 6 months and got a degree in Spanish, as well as my degree in elementary education. Then I went off to graduate school.
Did you ever teach Spanish?
I taught Spanish at an elementary school as part of my student teaching experience. They wanted someone to do that, and so I volunteered. I had a ball. I had a great time with it.
Now, your first teaching job was where?
It was in my hometown. I went back home because by this point my sister had moved out, and so I went back home to take care of my mother, and I taught in my hometown.
Now, your father, you said, died very young.
Yes, he was 55 when he died.
And you had some siblings that died.
Yes.
You have heart disease in your family, I
Right.
read in your the research.
My brothers and my dad all died of heart disease, and 55, 56 is pretty old for people in my family. My older sister died of lung cancer when she was 42. So time is a precious commodity for us.
So how many of the 7 children of your family are still living?
My youngest sister and my oldest brother.
And you?
And me.
The 3 of you. And are they back east?
My brother's in Phoenix, my sister's in Dallas.
Okay. When you started teaching, had you met your husband, Joe?
Actually, Joe and I met when we were in Clarion. We went together for a long time. Then I went to Spain and we broke up. Then I came home and we both got engaged to someone else.
Oh. And?
And unknown to each other, we both broke those engagements. And then out of the blue, I keep getting these things happening to me.
Yeah.
Out of the blue, I got this letter from Joe saying, I'd like to see you again. I thought, got engaged to someone else, huh?
Yes, so did you, but that's beside the point.
But that was beside the point. I knew I'd broken my engagement. I didn't know about his. And so I said that we could see each other, and he was teaching in New York State at the time. But I said, he said, well, why don't I come could I come for spring break? And I said, that would be fine. But in between, we weren't going to do any explanations over the phone or in letters or anything. He could just show up and we'll start in person. Well, my mom, who always thought Joe was the guy I should marry, he spent that entire time writing to my mother. He would call my mother. He'd send my mother gifts. So I knew, you know, this was a plan. And so he came and we were married the following summer.
Oh, and then you both of them went, have you ever taught together in the same school district?
Just here. It's the first
Just
time this
here.
ever happened. At one point, Joe taught in one school district. I was a superintendent in another school district. And our children went to a third school district because we lived in a third school district. So trying to remember the first day of school was really confusing.
And going to all those meetings.
Oh.
My.
I do remember one time sending the children off to the babysitters all dressed for the first day of school. Unfortunately, it wasn't their first day, it was mine.
Oh, that's great. Tell me where your kids are.
Mark is here in Iowa City. He's a flight instructor for the Iowa City Airport and would like to be a commercial pilot someday. And Anne-Marie is finishing up her senior year here at the University of Iowa in international business, and has just returned from Australia, where she studied for 6 months, and is determined to go back there and study law and become an international lawyer.
How wonderful. And I hear that you and your husband you fill in each other's blanks a lot.
Yes.
That he is the gardener, or you both garden?
Actually, Joe's in charge of all the beauty in our lives. So he's the artist, and he collects art, and he collects antiques, and he does the gardening. Although there was one horrible year when he had hurt his back, and I had to do all the gardening.
Was this when you were a superintendent?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes. And while he thought, you know, if you love gardening, it's very relaxing. If you see it as another part-time job, it is not very relaxing.
Right. If you're just trying to squeeze it in before the next meeting.
But I want to tell you, we had the biggest flowers you've ever seen. When I was in charge of fertilizing, I miracle growed everything. We had such a vigorous year out in our yard.
This must have been in Milwaukee.
No, it was here.
No, it was here.
It was here. I just
Oh.
decided if you're going to garden, you might as well do it right. And so we had these wonderful plants.
Tell me, how did you decide to get into administrating and leave the classroom?
Actually, it was the result of a very bad principal.
Oh, okay.
The school that I taught in Milwaukee had a principal that was actually let go the year after he opened a new school, and then he quit. And that was a good thing for him and for us, because he really hated it. And he didn't have very good consensus building skills. His idea of running the school was to let everything go along until he got mad about something, and then he gave an edict, and it never made any sense because he never checked with anybody. But I decided, you know, I could really do this better. And then we had this, I was very active in our teachers union. And at that time, in that particular school district, we didn't have any reading help for young kids. If they didn't know how to read, you just kept working with them as the classroom teacher. And there were a rather vociferous group of parents who really wanted reading help provided by the schools, and I thought they were right. I also had a degree in reading, so we were going to have this board meeting where we were going to present to the board what we thought could be done to help these children, and the board president got really angry that all of these people wanted to talk about it, and so he let them know that they were only going to allow one speaker that night, and they could choose someone that they wanted to speak. Well, I was a brand new, non-tenured teacher, and so they asked me to speak. I said, oh, sure, I can talk about this. And so we went to the board meeting. Well, it turned out it got a little nerve-wracking because they had to move the board meeting because they had so many people they couldn't fit them in the boardroom. So then we had to truck up the hill to another location. So by the time everybody settled down, the board president, who was not an even-tempered man at that point, was really absolutely livid that he'd been put through all this inconvenience. So standing up to speak to him was not the world's easiest task. But I stood up and made this presentation, and the next day the superintendent, I got this little note that says the superintendent would like to see you in his office. I thought, well, this was the shortest career I've ever had.
Non-tenured teacher.
And so I went down, and he said, you know, you said last night that you really know what these children need. And I said, yes, I do. And he said, well, fine, do it. I said, I have this classroom. He said, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to become the reading teacher, and you can hire, we're going to need 2 of them. You hire the other one. And since you said you know what this job is about, you design it and you do it.
And you did.
I said, okay. I said, here's the condition, though. I'll do it for a year. I'll get it all set up for you. And then I want my classroom back because I love teaching. He said, okay. Well, at the end of the year, that never happened because at the end of that year, the person who was our special education director was killed in an automobile accident that year. And that was the same year that Wisconsin passed their own special education legislation, which was enormously complicated. So we had this little conversation again about if you would set this up for a year, then at the end of the year, I'd give you back your classroom. I said, well, all right, but I'm only doing this for a year. Well, 10 years later, I was still, I'd gone from, we had to come up with the title because I wasn't certified to be a special education director. So I became the local program coordinator, which I thought was kind of catchy. I didn't realize to him it meant anything he wanted. So pretty soon I was coordinating everything. But I went from there to assistant superintendent in that district. So I started out as a first grade teacher and left there as their assistant superintendent. And then he's the one that convinced me that I could run my own district because he would keep saying to me, you know, you really ought to try this. So, and during that time I was going to school all the time.
Okay.
working on my PhD.
So you got your PhD in Milwaukee, and then that's when you went to, was Shorewood your first job
Right.
as a
Shorewood was my
superintendent?
first superintendency. And at the time that I went to Shorewood, they not only had never had a woman superintendent, they had never had a woman administrator in any part of the district in its entire history.
How was that for you as a woman?
It was pretty good, actually. I mean, it's a wonderful school district, and people were very nice. Once we got past the headline, you know, the headline wasn't new superintendent named, the old superintendent was named Brown, and so the headline was, Woman Replaces Brown. As if it was a major event that any woman would dare. I mean, it was...
But you were there a long time, and I read, or you told me, that the average time for a superintendent in a school the size of Shorewood and Iowa City is about 2.5 years.
Well, Shorewood was a little bit longer because that was a smaller school district, so I was there about 10 years, and it's about 7 or 8 for those superintendents. But when you get in a district our size, it's considered more urban.
Sure.
Then it's about 2 to 2.5 years.
You know, I love what you tell new administrators about your advice to them about they better know who they are. Share that. I like that a lot.
One of the things that I've noticed as I've gone through my own career and the people that I've admired the most is that they're the same people, whether they're in their church or in their family or in their community or in their jobs. And the reason they are is because they have this value system that is thoughtful on their part. They know who they are. And so when I visit with new administrators, I tell them, be sure you know who you are, because when you get in the middle of a controversy, you won't have time to figure it out. You'll have to know what you stand for. So think about that. Be conscious about what you stand for and what's important to you. And then the decisions will fit in to what you believe in. But you have to think it through a little bit at the beginning.
So you don't get broadsided.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
and spend all that time doing that. Who of the people in your life have made you stretch and grow? Both, I suppose, both people who are positive and people who are negative.
Well, I would say, first of all, my parents, because the whole theory of you can do and be whatever you want, but you have to want it. You have to want it badly enough to work hard enough to get it. I think we're the first kind of influences on that. Then I think the second person were people like Dr. Hufford, the debate coach. I mean, that was a time when 2 women never made up a debate team at the varsity level. It was a male sport completely. And if there was a woman, the only reason you were on the team is because there was a good man on the team that could carry it. And for 2 women to compete and win consistently at the level that
You were breaking new ground then, weren't you?
almost constantly.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it was a lot of fun the whole time we were doing it. Although I do remember one debate when we had been debating for a long time, and I stood up to give the speech, and I finished the speech and passed out cold because I hadn't had anything to eat for a while. And then we actually won that tournament. And the story of the tournament was that the people that we beat in the final round said it's not bad enough to be beaten by 2 women, but one of them wasn't even conscious.
What a great story.
So there was a little bit of that all along, but it was never done. It was never done to prove that 2 women could do it. It was done because we could do it, which is sort of the philosophy that my father had established. You don't go out to conquer the world to be confrontational about it. If it's your dream, being good at it is your best defense. It's competence that makes it possible for you to do things. And so you don't need to be confrontational, you need to be competent about what you do. And you need to do it at the highest level you can. And then your dreams will come true because you will have, you know, not paid the price but worked for them. And then it works. I think the other people that have been significant have been people like my husband, who really, you know, when you move as fast as I did, I mean, I had my first superintendency when I was 36 years old, which was, you know, I got my PhD one day and the next day I got my job, which was kind of unheard of. And the theory in Wisconsin, and it is to some extent here, was you went to a small, out-of-the-way district and made all your mistakes there, and then you could get one of the good districts. Well, Shorewood was a lighthouse district known nationwide at the time I became its superintendent, so it was relatively unheard of that you would step in there as your first superintendency. And so people like my husband who said, well, of course you can. I mean, just go and tell them what you would do if you were the superintendent. And then I think the
So
other...
he believed in you just like your
Constantly,
father. Just like
constantly.
you could do
He's-
anything you want.
Anything you want. And he would be right there to help with it. And it's significant because he's such a person in his own right. I mean, we don't compete because we're not on the same field. I would never compete with him in anything artistic. I mean, he's absolutely amazing. And he's a very sensitive man. He's an outstanding teacher. I mean, just a wonder. He has a great compassion for young people. And then I think the other people are my own children. I think bringing up your children requires you to stretch constantly.
Yes.
And I always say that one of the things about bringing up independent, articulate children is that they practice on their parents.
Sure.
And that's the only way they get that way, because they have to practice somewhere. And I would say that my kids really did. You know, they're both in careers that are really different for me. I mean, for Mark to be an airplane pilot, I mean, that's just... I used to be terribly afraid of flying, and then Mark
And
took
you're over
me up.
that?
Well, Mark got his license and flew into Iowa City. He was at Ames and flew in and said, "Mom, will you fly with me?" Well, I hate flying, and I'd never been in a small plane in my life. I said, "Oh, Mark," but we were in front of all of his friends at the airport. I said, "Well, maybe if you didn't go real high."
Or
He
too
said-
fast.
He said, "Mom, trees. You have to get above the trees." I said, "Well, could we not go real fast?" That was my next line. And he said, "When planes don't go very fast, they fall out of the sky."
Oh, you got
So
your attention.
Right. So he took me up in this little plane, made this beautiful landing, goes, whew. And we pull in, and one of my friends was out at the airport. He said, "Barb, I can't believe you got out of that plane," because everybody knows how I feel about planes. I said, "Neither can I." He said, "How in the world did anyone get you in that plane?" And my son walked over. I said, "I'd like you to meet Mark Grohe, my son and pilot." And he said, "Oh, Mark, that's really nice. How long have you had your license?" And Mark said, 6 days. He goes, "Yo, Mom, that was really good." So your kids, I think,
Yes.
stretch you.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, I'm just curious about what you feel are your greatest challenges now, 1998 in this school district, and kind of your vision about where we should go.
Well, I think the vision is that we have the opportunity to continue to be one of the finest school districts in the United States. I think we know how to do education, and we do it well. I think we need to be continually open, though, to what I call a continuous improvement model. We need to always be looking at how can we do that even better, and that one of the things we have to be unafraid of is self-examination, and doing it in a very self-critical manner so that we can continue to grow, because everything around us is changing. Our entire community is changing. And as we feel those changes in the school, it doesn't require us to change our standards, but it requires us to think about different ways to meet the high standards and high expectations that we have. And I think as our community population changes, those changes are almost immediately reflected in the classrooms in our schools. I think that most people would be surprised who goes to school now, even when I look at the children with health needs in our community. You know, we had one little first grader for whom he received his chemotherapy injections at school because his parents didn't want him to miss any time, and neither did he, and it worked fine. And we have health aides that do a lot of medical assistance. We have children with enormously complicated lives and very severe needs. I mean, both in terms of poverty and enrichment, in terms of keeping them fed and clothed. And I know we all like to believe that they're just some little enclave of these children, and they're not really spread throughout our community, but they are. And as you look at all the human service agencies in town, many of whom we have partnerships to help us with these children, children are coming to school truly in need of the whole village helping them, because there isn't that core family that we had around us as we went through our lives. A whole extended family, or even a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone and kind of built a net around you so that you would be okay. Now the school is building the net and bringing the community service agencies in and trying to all work together. And I think that's a challenge that we need to pay attention to. If children don't if we're not serious about giving these children a good education and good connections to the communities in which they live, then we should not be surprised that they grow up to be adults that are not connected to their communities. And I think sometimes we all forget that, that part of the reason we understand community life and we're comfortable participating is because it was a part of our lives and we were connected. And I see so many people in the Iowa City Community School District who come in and give our kids what they're now not getting at home. People who are mentors and rock-and readers and reading buddies and tutors, people who give hundreds of hours to us. And what they really do is they make sure those children are connected. And that's the piece we have to pay attention to in the next 10 years. The technology is there for us to do amazing things in instruction, and we've certainly made a lot of advances in that. But the real teaching comes about when children are, when all of those physical and emotional needs are met, and they can actually take advantage of the teaching. And that takes all of us to connect those kids to us and to each other.
A lot of expectations on you, a lot of responsibility. And I'm sure your job at times is terrible. I know it's terribly controversial. I have to ask this question. How are you able to be so gracious under fire? Where does this come from, this ability to kind of get away from the negative energy, hear it, but not take it in? Do you know what I'm asking?
I'll tell you a story. When I was in Australia this summer, I went to visit my daughter who was studying there, and we rented a car. And in Australia, of course, you drive on the other side of the highway, which I had never done before. It was an interesting experience. And she couldn't drive the car because she was too young to be insured under the Australian rules, so I did all the driving. When I came back here, I was driving home, and the next day, you know how you get hit with the jet lag?
Sure.
Well, the next day or two, at one point, I just got hit really hard. I thought, I better get home. I'm really tired. And so I left the office at about 5:30, and I was driving home, and I live on Rapid Creek Road, and I turned off the highway onto Rapid Creek Road, and just for an instant, I couldn't remember which side of the road to be on, because they both felt right. Now, for most of my life, instinctively, if you were on the wrong side of the road, you felt it, because it just didn't feel right. Once you've seen both sides of an issue, they both feel right. And one of the things that debate helped with was
Back to debate.
there are two sides to every issue, and that everybody has a right to their perception. And so one of the things I try to do is kind of disassociate the anger off. Now, I have to tell you, I'm not always successful at that. Sometimes people say things that really hurt, and it's hard to lay those down. And that's when my husband and family come in, and my good friends come into being. I think sometimes people forget that when you're the kind of the lightning rod for some controversial issue, you're still you, and you have your children and your family and your friends.
And feelings.
And feelings in this community that you hope is your community too. One of the superintendents that was visiting with me a couple years ago said, the thing you need to remember, Barb, is you never live in the community where you're the superintendent. I said, what? He said, no, I mean you can live there, but it's never your community because you just work there. I said, no, I can't do that. Because why would you want to stay any place that won't let you be a part of their community? I won't work that kind of a job. So it is hard if this is your community and these are children that you really care about. What I keep trying to remember is even in anger, people sometimes have good ideas. And that's one of the things I tell new administrators too. The hardest people to listen to, and sometimes the people who have the most to teach you, are the people who are angry with you about what you did. If you can just step back far enough to hear them. There are sometimes gems of wisdom in there that no one else will tell you.
And I'm sure that ability that you have must have been part of the reason you were selected is the 1998 National Superintendent of the Year. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
That must have been quite something to go and receive that and then be able to give a $10,000, tell me about this, a scholarship.
Actually, the nicest part about this award, there are a couple of nice things. The first part is your colleagues nominate you, and that's how you get selected by your colleagues. And so it meant a great deal to me. I mean, when you think about starting out in this little river town in Pennsylvania and ending up national superintendent, there are 15,000 school districts in the United States, so being national superintendent was really amazing to me. Going back home and presenting the scholarship was fascinating. First of all, my high school doesn't exist anymore. It's now a middle school and a combined high school. We combined with our arch football rival, so it would be like making a single high school out of City and West. And so I got to speak at graduation, and no one knew who was getting the award. The faculty got to choose the person, but I got to announce it. And I had read their yearbook when I got there, and this was not a very wealthy part of town, or wealthy community, and it hasn't gotten a whole lot better. And so they're really struggling now. And in their yearbook, they had talked about the fact that the high school had become a rather tough place, and they had been on this campaign to change its reputation, and the kids were sensitive to the fact that while the students in the school knew the reputation had changed, the rest of the community hadn't caught up to them yet. And so they were talking about how they were going to try to keep changing the reputation of their school district and their community. And it was heartbreaking to hear these young people say, you know, this is a really good school and we wish people knew it. So when I talked to them at graduation, my goal was to convince them that you could start here and go anywhere you wanted to. This was a good place to be from. And they might not believe that now, but one time I was sitting where they were, and now I'm standing in front of them. And I'm telling them about the scholarship I'm going to present, and this is a great place to be from. You can go anywhere you want to from here. All you have to do is want it badly enough, and then you can get it. And then I got to present the scholarship to this young man who looked like my son. I mean, the kid stood up and I thought, good grief, it's Mark Grohe. And it wasn't, it was James Richardson. And he came up to get his award, and an absolutely delightful young man.
Was it based on need?
It was need, but not, that was only a small part of it. It was scholarship, and that was only a small part of it. The largest part of it was leadership. And this kid had been the president of the art club and the president of the show choir, and he'd given 1,000 hours of community service to the hospital in the area. He was a letterman in 3 sports. I mean, this is an amazing young man. Where this kid found time to sleep, I'll never know. And after the award, his dad came up to thank me, and his dad couldn't talk because he was crying. So his brother came over, who was in medical school, and he said, you know, my dad believes that if you have a dream, you should go for it. And so my brother wanted to go to this particular school, the University of Virginia in architecture, and there's no way we can afford that. He said, but my dad told him, you apply anyway. And you have to apply to a couple of other places, but apply to your dream, and we'll see if we can figure out a way to get you there. And he said, you just made his dreams come true. Because there's no way he could have gone to this school without this.
Barbara, that must have been one
It was
of the
wonderful.
greatest moments.
It felt,
So
I was
good.
so proud, and the president of the board was standing next to me, and it turns out the president of the board was in my graduating class, and she and I were best friends. And her son was graduating that night.
The circle comes around. I think we ought to close on that wonderful story, and what a positive note. And thank you for being my guest on
My
One
pleasure.
of a Kind. My guest on One of a Kind is School Superintendent Barbara Grohe. Words used to describe Barb are resilient, genuine, positive, resolute, and very, very gracious. She believes that the door to success for each child is the quality of education that we, as a society, can provide. Her many honors include the 1998 National Superintendent of the Year, the first woman Iowa Superintendent of the Year, a meritorious service award given by the Wisconsin Association of Educators, the Gifted and the Talented. She was selected as one of the Executive Educators Outstanding 100 Educators, and earlier in her career was named the Outstanding Young Educator. She wears many hats. She's a guest speaker, a writer on educational issues, teacher, administrator, wife, mother, and civic volunteer. How fortunate for our community that Barb Grohe accepted the job as superintendent of the Iowa City School District. Barbara Grohe is one of a kind.